So this is Charles, and he is with the Counterman Amendment. Charles, would you like to introduce yourself more clearly with your first and last name and what you do?
Thank you, Teresa. Thank you for this interview. My name is Charles Kaprowitz. I am the Executive Director for Citizen Initiatives and the Countermand Amendment. We are citizens who are working to amend the U.S. Constitution with the countermand for the purpose of giving the state legislatures the authority to countermand and rescind federal laws that are burdensome to the states and their citizens. I've been working on amendments under Article 5 for 40 years, either through Congress and or state legislatures. Probably I have the longest longevity of anyone in the Article 5 arena. And I suppose from an education standpoint, my BA is at Cal State, 4.5 years of postgraduate work at Loyola Law School and Moody Bible Extension Studies, plus constitutional studies for the last several decades. I'm the author of 4 books, and my latest book is The Countermand Amendment, the missing piece in the Article 5 puzzle.
Wow, I had no idea. You'll have to. What books did you write?
Well, one book was The Unborn Child Amendment. The other was Reclaiming America. It was a prophetic book. And my latest book is Countermand Amendment, the missing piece in the Article 5 puzzle. The first book was kind of a corollary to the Unborn Child Amendment.
Are they all still available?
No, the Reclaiming America is available as well as Countermand Amendment. You can get those on Amazon.
Okay, I'll put them up on the screen. Okay, so tell us what this Counterman Amendment does, because I know there was a big to do on my website, on my YouTube, about when I put up the Convention of the States stuff, and there was a lot of people commenting about Convention of the States, but most people, once they saw the simplicity of the Countermand Amendment, it seemed that most people really liked the Countermand Amendment, and I believe it was because of the simplicity. So, can you further explain the Countermand Amendment?
Yes, I'd be glad to, Teresa, and I thank you for asking. We've got a real problem in America when it comes to understanding sovereignty. We are an egalitarian culture, which means that we've been brought up to believe that everybody is equal and all ideas are equal and everything is an equal opinion. But there are some things that are just simply more equal than others, and one of which is the inalienable rights that we have: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, codified in the Declaration of Independence and then guaranteed in the Constitution in one form or another. But you see, sovereignty is the key through we the people. We the people are the only electors on the planet who have the authority as sovereigns to modify the constitution of their country through the ballot and modify the direction of their government. And because we are a republic that is with each state having one vote, in spite of the left's relentless attacks on the republican concept, we in fact still have an opportunity to restore this constitutional republic, because we have far more states' rights states and conservative leaning states than we have liberal states. The biggest argument that took place in the Constitutional Convention in 1787, and this happened even before deliberations started, had to do with sovereignty. The largest states, just like the Democrats do today, the largest states wanted voting at the Constitutional Convention to be by population of the states. And the little states said, no, this is not an acceptable solution to solving our sovereignty. All the states saw themselves as nation states. They hadn't yet formed a federal government. The Articles of Confederation had failed, and they were trying to modify them. And the fact is that the little states put their heels in, or dug their heels in, and there was a great battle. And in the wrangling, the little states eventually won. They put a man in charge by the name of George Wythe. He was a delegate, an attorney, a professor of law. He was a distinguished gentleman. And he put a committee together and created 8 rules for the convention. And one of those rules was that every state would have one vote. Why? Because they wanted to protect their nation-state status, their republican status in any federal government that would be formed. And they went back to the delegates from the different states at that time and began to discuss it. There was more wrangling, but at the end, he won. And we had a Republican form of convention. Now, had we not had a Republican form of convention, it is my conviction that we would have had a tyranny, because we would have wound up having everything being done by the most populous states. And that meant that the character of the little states will have been subject to the will of the big ones. I've traveled in, I think, every state in the Union except Alaska. And I am impressed with the distinct character that each state has, and its history, and its people who express different values. For an example, in North Dakota, there's kind of an independence about the way they do everything up there that's based on a Midwestern cowboy mentality. Utah has a very strong Mormon influence on its government. Louisiana is a Cajun state, and it has very, very distinct qualities. North Carolina has distinct qualities for the South. So is Georgia, so is South Carolina, and on and on. But you see, if you lose your Republican form of government, those characteristics, those qualities within each state get lost. That's what we're fighting right now. Every federal mandate, whether it be by executive order, whether it be by Supreme Court mandates, whether it be by Congress, whether it be by regulatory agencies like the EPA, BLM, that's the Environmental Protection Agency, or the Bureau of Land Management, but there are a host of others, they wind up dominating us. And as long as the supremacy clause in the Constitution is misused in this way, not giving the states the opportunity to counter federal mandates, the states lose their character. And we lose our republic bit by bit. We're almost at the point where we don't have a republic left. And so when we are looking at our constitutional republic, we are fighting for its life. And the only way we can fight for it is for the state legislatures to recognize that under Article 5, they are sovereign through we the people. And that big battle that took place at the Constitutional Convention, dealing with how voting would take place, guaranteed that the states would remain sovereign. Excuse me. And the states had one further problem. They had to figure out a way to pass that same sovereignty down from the legislatures at that time to future legislators, so that future legislatures could address issues of encroachment by the federal government or any other issue not addressed by the federal government in a way that gave the states the sovereign authority to do so. Well, Article 5 is the founder's answer, and the state legislatures ratified it. And basically what Article 5 did, it allowed the Constitution's supremacy and perpetuity to remain intact. Second, it allowed the legislatures to amend the Constitution, but for a limited purpose. And if you read Article 5, you will find twice it is mentioned it's for proposing amendments. And it is not for amending the Constitution through delegates. It is not by rewriting the Constitution. It's not by abdicating Article 5 authority and sovereignty in state legislatures to governors or Congress or the Supreme Court. When the states ratify an amendment, regardless of whether it comes from Congress and or through a convention, it becomes the principles upon which this Constitution stands, and every branch of the federal government is obliged to obey it. So the legislators are the final arbiters in all constitutional matters. They're sovereign through we the people. And for whatever reason, we've gotten so far away from this. I remember in law school thinking, or anyway, even hearing a discussion about sovereignty was never considered. I don't remember anyone talking about sovereignty. It was precedent, it was legal standing, it was procedure, it was Supreme Court rulings, statutes, never sovereignty. Because lawyers don't think in sovereign terms. They've been trained to think in terms of what was and how does it fit today, rather than we are sovereign today and everything in the past doesn't control what we do today. When you're sovereign, you don't need anyone's permission to do what you want to do. And so under Article 5, as long as the state legislatures are advancing amendments under the clause for proposing amendments, not only is Congress obliged to obey their applications and their directions, but at the same time, all branches of the federal government must obey the ratified amendment as well. And as long as the state legislatures remain sovereign, we can restore this republic. If they lose their sovereignty because of the flawed arguments that have come from the John Birches and the Eagle Forums back 40, 50 years ago, who have claimed that Article 5 conventions you can only have a constitutional or open convention, which implies that it will destroy the Constitution because the delegates can do whatever they want. And they were paralleling the idea of delegates under Article 5 with the founders, a very flawed parallel. I really am annoyed by it, to be honest. And on top of that, they left the understanding that if you use Article 5, you'll lose your Constitution. They never talked about for proposing amendments. And they used some very flawed reasonings, historical reasonings that didn't happen. For an example, the claim that these groups make is that there was a usurpation of power by the delegates at the Annapolis Convention, which was under the Articles of Confederation, the purpose for which was to amend the Articles in order to establish some rules whereby the states can work with each other in commerce and maybe a few other areas. But the point is, it failed. Only 5 states came, and as a result, Hamilton and Madison, they sent update letters to the Confederation Congress, and they said, look, this Annapolis Convention was not a success. We only had 5 states represented. We had no quorum, and we could do very little. We need for the Confederation Congress and the legislatures to summon delegates to an extension of this convention for examining all of the exigencies of the Articles of Confederation for the purpose of modifying them sufficiently so that we might even have a different constitution. And so it was an open convention, and that transition was quite proper. And the state legislatures, after receiving summons from Congress, agreed. And they sent 73, they called, Congress summoned 73 delegates, which is another issue that we have today. They don't even know how the government's going to summon delegates to a convention. They claim it's got to be by this or by that. That's nuts. It's just based on the number of members of Congress that you have that Congress summons. That's the way they do it. It's quite clear. It's in our history. But the point is, there were 73 summoned, about 54 attended. Many of them couldn't afford it. Some were sick. There were a number of delegates that had other reasons that they couldn't make it. But when they attended the conference, their purpose was to create a new government. And it was under the authority of an open convention, which is why we call it a constitutional convention. And with that, they had to create a new constitution and an understanding of how that government would function. That was a big task. The delegates were still representatives of their legislatures, but they had a lot of latitude. They were really charting new ground. And their genius was primarily in Article 5. Because in Article 5, delegates are different. They're not for the purpose of creating a new government. Article 5 delegates, when they're called to, let's say, a Countermand Amendment Convention, they're not called there to revamp the entire Constitution. What they're called for is to decide whether or not a specific amendment, in our case, the Countermand Amendment, pre-approved by the state legislatures, should be voted up or down. That's how Congress worked. Congress, when they sent out 27 amendments, every one of them were voted up or down, individually. And the states have the same prerogative, but they are the final arbiters because they had to ratify everything, including what Congress sent out. So why I had this long-winded explanation, Teresa, is COS, Convention of States, has a very flawed understanding of who the delegates are going to an Article 5 convention. They understand the delegates are equivalent to the founders and are going to a constitutional convention, though in a modified form, because they think that they can call a convention for the purpose of examining subjects. They have three general subjects that they propose, which is in itself erroneous because it's for proposing amendments, not subjects. At any rate, so they think the delegates have a lot of authority. And my position is far different. Under Article 5, I see the delegates as ambassadors of their legislatures, not free agents. And as ambassadors, they represent their legislatures to do the will of the legislatures. Article 5 delegates are not the same as the founders. And as a result, they are very restricted as to what they can and can't do. And so one of the things we've done is introduced a delegate resolution, which actually is a contract between the legislatures and the delegates going. And the purpose is to tell them how to organize the convention so they don't make the same mistakes that they did in the Constitutional Convention, how to vote by simple majority, and then how to approve the amendment, which is a pre-approved amendment in the delegate resolution. So the countermand amendment being pre-approved by their legislature is the only thing they can vote on. And then there are penalties if they don't oblige their legislatures. And it also, by the way, the delegate resolution that we have avoids any possible conflicts with Article 1, Section 10, which simply prohibits the states from entering into interstate compacts without the consent of Congress, which we want to avoid. So the fact remains that COS has embarked on a course of action that is dangerous. It causes the usurpation of authority in we the people, assigns it to delegates, and they have some other inherent problems as well dealing with Congress and the Supreme Court, and they see things in the Supremacy Clause area in ways that limit the legislatures, so that the legislatures are not the sovereign entity. And so given that, they are presenting to the state legislatures a flawed understanding of Article 5. I am impressed with the genius of the founders by giving us Article 5. What I'm not impressed with is that our legislators today are so foolish, and actually over the last 40 years, have been so foolish not to understand its purpose. It's quite clear. So these are the problems that we have with COS. I'm quite disturbed with COS, by the way. I did receive a telephone call in January of 2014 from a gentleman by the name of Michael Farris, the chief director for COS, and in the course of explaining to me what they were planning to do, and I had already been in this thing over almost 40 years, and now he's telling me what he's just started doing a couple of months ago. And he's saying, look, we've accomplished a lot in a couple of months. He was a gentleman. He's a fine attorney. He's a man of character. I know that. He's a patriot. But he says to me, these are the things we've accomplished, and you know, what have you done in 40 years? In essence, he's saying maybe the Lord wants you to think in different terms. Well, I said, look, Michael, I said, do you not realize that if it weren't for me and a few others like me, you wouldn't even be in that position you're in now? And he had also offered to have me as a member of his executive team. Now, his chief scholar, a fellow by the name of Rob Nadelson, who I know personally, I've had two very long conversations with him, and who, in fact, endorsed our delegate resolution, though it wasn't called that at the time, but he endorsed it about 5 years ago. How he came around to change his thinking, I don't know, but he did. And so when Mr. Farris asked me if I would be available to be on their executive team, I said, Michael, let me ask you two questions. One, would you endorse a pre-approved text for an amendment by the state legislatures before it goes to the convention? He says no. See, he thinks delegates are autonomous. He thinks that they are free agents, like the founders had to create a constitution, so delegates have to create amendments. And then the second, I said, well, would you endorse a delegate resolution by the state legislatures that would bind the delegates? He said no. I said, well, I guess I can't join your team. And it didn't matter if they had proposed something or paid me for something. That wasn't the question. The question was sovereignty. We must not surrender sovereignty in we the people. And if we do, we will never restore this republic. His method of addressing issues with Article 5, many of his ideas that they've adopted came from us, by the way. But the fact is, his idea is going to be filled with politics, and it's going to create mayhem at the convention if they ever convene one. So those are just some ideas I have to answer that comment and question about COS.
Yeah, see, the thing that gets me, and I am like a schoolhouse rock kind of gal, and I know this sounds ridiculously stupid, probably, but in my opinion, and this is just me, the simpler something is, and the easier for the normal person to understand, I think the better off you are. For instance, I'll give you an example. When I first heard Counterman Amendment, I had no idea what the term countermand meant. I had to look it up. Okay? When I looked it up, I saw that it meant like a veto. Is that what it means? Countermand means basically the same thing as veto?
Yeah, not in a full legal sense. It means nullifying. The idea is you are defying the federal government by making a statement that you do not agree with their mandate or their law. And you are literally putting yourself in opposition to it. Now, you haven't, with the countermand by itself, which is, I think, an excellent concept, it has no teeth. But when you add to it that when 30 states countermand a particular law or ruling, it's rescinded automatically. Now it's got teeth. But when you add to it that when 30 states countermand a particular law or ruling, it's rescinded automatically. Now it's got teeth. So now the states can actually countermand a federal law, nullify a federal law. They don't have to stand alone anymore, which is what they have to do under the concept of nullification. And then they go out and they try to get 30 states, 29 other states, to join them in that countermand through what we call legislative countermand committees in the legislatures. And at any rate, when they get to 30, now that law is rescinded. Now the federal government can no longer enforce it. That's the reason why it has teeth.
Okay, so nullify. See, and what I want to do, I want to try to make this in plain English for the normal person that's not an attorney, so they can stand behind this, because as I said on one of my videos, the reason I could not fully stand behind the Convention of the States was because it was too vague and I couldn't understand it. And it's the nullification then means that a law will no longer be in effect. Is that what that means?
Yes, countermand, a form of nullification, when 30 states nullify that same law or countermand that same law, it is rescinded automatically, and the federal government can no longer enforce it.
I mean, to me, that is incredible. That, to me, says, and it may not be perfect, but to me, it gives the states the power of veto. And that's why that's something that I can stand behind. And maybe veto or gives the states power of nullification. And to me, that is just a simple thing. So basically, what you would do is get 37 states, is that correct, to do the identical paperwork for the Countermand Amendment. Is that correct?
Only 30. 60% of the state legislatures, 30 states right now.
Wow, that's great. And then you would have them file basically the same paperwork stating the same thing that would give them countermand basically authority. And then after that is passed, from then on, 30 states would get together and could pass a countermand against Obamacare or whatever. Is that basically what it is?
Absolutely. That's exactly what it is. And the thing is that the discretion is in the hands of the states. It's not in the hands of the federal government. With this amendment ratified, the federal government will learn how to respect the states and treat them as partners in government, not subjects to federal mandates. They will know that anything they do, whether it be a Supreme Court law, congressional act, executive order, could even be a treaty, it could be countermanded and rescinded with 30 states. And believe me, they will take into account the fact that we the people have some clout.
Right, and I think that is a wonderful, wonderful beginning of what we need to do because I mean even with the open borders thing with Agenda 21, wow, that could make a difference. It could make such a difference with the indefinite detention NDAA. It's a wonderful start to something that I
It
think
is.
the
Right.
states can jump in on. That's where I find the beauty of it. And people try to complicate it. And when these big words are used that normal everyday citizens don't use in their everyday language, I think that's what puts off. It put me off because I had to look up counterman, but now
Yes.
I understand the law aspect of what it means, you know?
Yes, I understand. And I suppose they, as well as we, try very hard to say things in simpler terms, but sometimes it's not always possible.
Right.
When you're dealing with the subject of sovereignty and citizens, this is important that you get across to them the idea they own the government. The government doesn't own them. That puts them in an entirely different role in their life in relationship to the federal government. And so all of a sudden they look at, hey, if we have controls over the government and we're giving up those controls for some entitlements, that's crazy. And yet at the same time, if they don't understand sovereignty, they never come to a conclusion that gets them to act. The thing that makes the counterman doable is not millions of people who might get behind us, even though that would be lovely. And maybe that will happen. But it's the fact that there are about 7,000 state legislators who we work with. And out of those 7,000, we only need 2,622 in order to make this work and to get this application adopted. So, and then to get it ratified, we only need 2,900. And so what we're talking about are numbers that are achievable. We don't need millions, but we need people to help us to get to these legislators.
Now, that's a good one. What do you need in terms of volunteers? Because I saw a couple of the comments on this thing. They were so willingly to get behind this that they wanted to know what they can do to help. Tell us, what do you need?
Thank you, Teresa. We ask you folks to join us as state directors. We need a lot of state directors. We have directors all over the country, but we don't have enough. We can have multiple directors in each state. We also need supporters. We need people who not only get the grunt work done, but also can help us in coordinating visits to state legislatures and conference calls and so forth. Telephone work of different types. They'd be calling not just their state, but other states as well. Some of our state directors do an excellent job with that. And we need donations, of course. You can go to Countermands. Let me stop. Countermands.us. That's with an S. COUNTERMANDS.us. And you can make a donation by clicking the donate button at the top. If it's recurring, that helps us a lot because we can better schedule our budget. But one-time donations are more than welcome. You can also order a copy of my book, the Counterman Amendment, Article 5 book, by clicking the link to PayPal on the left. And then lastly, we have a link there that will allow you to sponsor a copy of our book to state legislatures. And if you click that, we send a book out to those legislators for $19.95, and that includes postage and shipping and packaging. And we get the documents with that to them. So, in fact, the legislators they have in firsthand the information that they need. Now, many of these legislators know who we are. When I send out emails to 7,000, I get hundreds, maybe 1,000 or more that open my emails and read them. We're making an impression, but we need folks to follow up. And that's very, very important. So if somebody out there wants to join us, go to countermands.us, click the contact button, and it'll send you to a form that will allow you to submit your information. Or you can contact me at director@countermands.us, and I will be glad to respond personally and assign you to one of our regional and national directors. But it is an important work. I do believe this work is the most important constitutional work since the 1787 convention. I believe that we are fighting for the Constitution and this republic, most people don't understand the importance, and that's one of the reasons why just simplicity isn't always the answer. But the republic stands in the balance, but for this countermand amendment. Now, when the countermand amendment is ratified, Teresa, it isn't citizen initiatives, our group, that's going to decide what issues have to be addressed. It'll be people like you and others all over this country who will be working with their state legislators, telling their state legislators issues that they have had problems with dealing with federal encroachment. Could be Agenda 21. It could be energy issues. It could be EPA rulings on land use, water and so forth. It could be any number of things. But now your legislator will have the ability to do something on your behalf. And he then will submit your information to the Countermand Legislative Committee and ask them to consider this and to initiate a countermand. Now, if that committee, and that committee will be composed of legislators or in that legislature, if they decide that your particular petition is needing to be going forward, they then will countermand it and then immediately send out invitations to the other legislative committees asking them to join them, giving the reasons why this is an important issue that affects their states as well. And by the way, there's also likely to be some horse trading. There might be issues up in Alaska, say, dealing with land grabs. Alaska has about 67% of its land controlled by the federal government. But New Hampshire doesn't have such a problem. But New Hampshire might have another issue, maybe dealing with free markets or something. And so New Hampshire will say to Alaska, look, you've sent this request to us. It's not something that really directly affects us. But if you could help us with this other issue that we're dealing with, when we send out our countermand, we will be glad to join you in this one. And so the trade-off can take place to reach that 30. But once the citizen initiates it, it becomes something that now the legislators can have a proper representation for their constituents. And it puts the clout back into the hands of the citizen. Now, some of them may never go anywhere, but the fact is many of them will. Nevada, as we speak, 82% of the land in Nevada is controlled by the federal government. 82%. That is nothing less than insane.
Yeah.
And the fact that they've allowed this to happen is nuts, but they have. And part of the reason is because no one really thought to fight it. Now that we're in deep trouble, they have no way out. The states are helpless to stop that. The federal government, through one of the agencies, BLM, as they recently did in the Bundy Ranch case, they said, look, we're cording off your land. You owe us $2 million in land use. And Bundy had been on that land for two generations, 2 or 3 generations. And we want your cattle off the land, and we're going to be saving it now for the prairie dog. And I think there was a tortoise involved. I'm not remember correctly there. But the fact is, get off. Now, the state had no authority to stop the federal government. An agency, an unelected, bureaucratic, unaccountable, politically charged bureaucrat, the state had no way to counter it. None. And so Bundy got himself in trouble. There was almost a shootout. The BLM is still looking at ways to take over the use of that land, kicking his cattle off. And then it jumped up to Oregon and so forth. And so what I'm trying to bring us to our attention is that the states have no authority right now to counter any of this. That's why executive orders are so strong. That's why when the Supreme Court makes a ruling under the Supremacy Clause of the United States, it's been constitutionalized. Why? Without the ratification of the states. Because the Supremacy Clause says that the federal government has the final say, and the Supreme Court has assumed to itself that it, under every circumstances, is the final word. But you see, they're not. And they're not because none of them have accepted the idea that we the people are sovereign. We created the government. That's why it says in the Constitution, we the people. It doesn't say the monarch so-and-so. It says we the people. And because our elites have decided that they know better, they've lost sight of the fact that we the people are the ones who own the government. And as a result, we can counter their decisions. They're not the final arbiters. the state legislatures are through we the people. So that's why the countermand amendment is so terribly important. On top of that, if we can get this thing through quickly, and that also is one of the reasons why those listening and who want to join us need to move quickly. The moment that this thing is ratified, then countermands can begin immediately. There are no drawn-out arguments and deliberations at the convention. It'll be 7 days and maybe 10, and the convention will be done and the amendment will be approved because of our delegate resolution. When 26 states approve that same resolution or more, it's a foregone conclusion. But the point is that when it goes to ratification, the moment that it's ratified, and we'll work our tails off to get ratifications ASAP, maybe by the middle or the end of next year. But when ratification's completed, now the states start countermanding immediately. They don't have to be asking permission to do this and do that. They don't have to negotiate with delegates as to what this means and what that means. It is now official. They have the authority to say, federal government, you stepped on our toes too many times, and we're countermanding. And now when we get 30 states, your law is going to be rescinded. And in addition to that, the countermand also can be applied to existing laws. So in essence, the states can evaluate the impact of existing federal rules and regulations and laws in such a way where if they've concluded, the states, that this is an infringement on our constitutional rights, they too can be countermanded. So, and I suppose there's one more thing to remember. The purpose of the countermand is not to put the federal government out of business. The federal government has a very legitimate role. It's to protect and to serve the states. That's why the founders put the Constitution together as they did with the division of powers and so forth. They wanted a way to protect the republic, but also to have the federal government function well. If any of you out there remember the term Federalist Papers, they were papers that were written by the patriots of that time, most of them founders, and they were sent out to the states to help the citizens understand the importance of the new Constitution that they were proposing before it got ratified. And when they were doing that, they were assenting to the fact that the people had the sovereign authority to make this decision, not them. It wasn't the legislatures by themselves. It was, in fact, the people who had to approve it. And we did. And we still have that same sovereign authority today. So, Teresa, there's one other thing, and maybe an answer to your Convention of State question. One of the things I object to with the Convention of States is this, that in their concept, they have what I would call a modified constitutional convention. They, instead of having a constitutional convention that's for the purpose of writing a new constitution or revamping ours in total, they have defined it according to 3 general subjects. And those subjects include reigning in government, fiscal policies, and then also term limits. Now, the problem that they have is that they have no way of defining the duties of the delegates. And so here we have 535 politically charged delegates who will be summoned to their convention from all the states. We've got 55 from California and 5 from Wyoming. Who's going to win that battle? And there's no delegate resolution to control them based on a republic. We've got 40 from New York, and we've got, 4 from South Dakota. So my point is, if we lose the 1 vote per state, we lose the convention, and we lose the republic. But with COS, they want all of these issues decided by these politically charged delegates. So can you imagine 535 of them looking at the subject of reigning in government? And they're going to start thinking, what does that mean? What do you mean by reigning? What do you mean by government? Is it non-government or just government, or is it judicial, or is it congressional? Is it executive? Is it agencies? How are you going to define reigning in government? So they have to decide that. And assuming that they can come up with some general description of what reigning in government means, then they will probably have 24 or more subsubjects, all of which will be general. They'll have to decide each one of those. And then under that, we'll have more subsubjects. And so it can go on. And their politically charged delegates are going to have to deal with this. And if they ever come to a conclusion, which could be a long time at the convention, it's not likely to be an amendment that would satisfy 38 ratifying states. 3/4 of the states have to ratify. And then after they finish that task, they have to do it then for fiscal policies and go through the same process. And then they have to do the same for term limits. Now, they like our countermand amendment. They've already been telling people that they want to use it, but they want the delegates to decide what it says. They don't want it decided by the legislatures. And for that reason, they are creating a deception in the minds of those who are hearing what they are saying that makes it sound like the best of us is really what they represent. But they don't represent us. And they are abdicating sovereign authority and we the people through their delegates. And there is no reference in the Article 5 for delegates. There's no reference for a constitutional convention in the Article 5. The only thing it says, it's for proposing amendments twice. So it's clear, but they don't want that clarity. They want to design it according to some constitutional scholar, so-called, the purpose for which is to create a mindset that makes it sound like delegates are really equivalent to a constitutional convention founder.
That's incredible and frightening at the same time because, I mean, just thinking about that, to get all those people in one room to decide on all this stuff would be forever. We could lose our country by that time, easily.
Well, we may very well lose it even before we can get the countermand ratified because of the mess we're in. But at the same time, they could be years and years from getting it done. We could be 12 months and we can get it done, you see.
Yes, yes.
So there's a big difference. Plus, when we get it done, it's not, for the countermand, it solves just about every one of their problems. But at the same time, it allows the legislatures to start acting immediately, and they don't have to wait for the amendment to take effect at some future time and or start applying to and they don't have to wait for the federal government to decide what it means. You see, because when you write an amendment, the federal government they eventually decide what the amendment means as it relates to them. And that's one of the serious problems with the amendments. You'll notice that many of the amendments that have been passed, 27 of them, that have been ratified, at the bottom of the amendment it says, and Congress shall have the authority or the power to enforce the provisions of this article. Well, the problem is Congress doesn't always enforce anything. And they don't do things so that they force the executive to do anything. And they don't do anything to stop the federal Supreme Court from doing anything. But the Countermand Amendment can. And in the Countermand Amendment, there is a provision. There are two provisions. One, there is a limit. The states need to get a specific countermand done in 18 months. We don't want to paralyze the federal government. They have a special role. But it's as respected partners rather than as masters over subjects. But at the same time, when I'm losing my train of thought here, so I'm trying to pick up too many things at one time. When the countermand is enacted, there is an enforcement provision. And what it says is that intentional violators of the provisions of this amendment, which now will be a constitutional right for the states and the citizens, intentional violators can be prosecuted and once convicted by the federal government can go to prison for up to 5 years. Then in Section 6, the amendment says, and in the absence, and I'm paraphrasing, in the absence of federal prosecution of intentional violators in the absence of prosecution of intentional violators by the federal government, the states can prosecute under state laws and send the intentional, upon conviction, send the intentional violator to prison for 5 years under state laws. So the point that I'm making is the federal government is now going to be put on notice that they're not the only ones responsible for protecting the Countermand Amendment. You know, Senator Reid, who in my estimation was really a traitor because of this reason, he had 300 and some said 350 bills from the House that sat under his desk or in his desk, never ever introduced to the Senate for consideration. 7 years, 8 years this went on. And the purpose of our divided government is so that the House can work with the Senate in such a way where they can find what they like and what they don't like about proposed bills and then come up with some solutions. an enforcement provision, Mr. Reed will think twice before he would do such a thing regarding the countermand amendment. And anyone else will at the same time. Because all of a sudden any one of 50 states could prosecute. And they're going to say, wow, there's got to be somebody out there that want to get my tail if they find out what I did. So the point is, it will protect the amendment in a way that... and the other thing, Teresa, is very important for the audience to understand. The countermand amendment does not change the Constitution. It doesn't alter any of its guarantees or any of its provisions. Everything in the Constitution remains the same. But what it does do, it gives the states the authority to protect the Constitution by stopping federal encroachment on states' rights and personal liberties. And so if the states decide that a particular act of Congress or the federal government in any way, or other branches and so forth, if it is infringing on their personal liberties and states' rights, it says that they have the authority to stop it by rescission. The reason? So it complies with the Constitution. Constitution is not touched. The supremacy clause in the Constitution remains the same, which is in the first part of the Article 1, I think it's in, or maybe it's in Article 6. I haven't looked at it for a while. But the fact is, the supremacy clause simply allows when, if the federal government makes a decision that is binding on the states, well, that'll remain the same, but it will be subject to a countermand if it's an infringement or an encroachment on states' rights. That's the big difference, and it puts the relationship between the federal government and the states in a proper, workable arrangement where there's a proper balance of power. And I think that that's going to make our government function much, much better.
Absolutely. It sounds like a beautiful thing. I have one question. The Supreme Court rulings, can that be countermanded?
Yes, it can, and it has to be. And now, the reason I say it that way is if the state legislatures are sovereign, through we the people, then there's nothing that the federal government can do that is not subject to a countermand. But if you said something like the Supreme Court decision that was back in the early 1800s, the purpose for which was to make sure that when they ruled, made a decision, there was a banking situation in Maryland that helped to create this. But at any rate, when they make a decision, it's the law of the land and no one can counter it. Well, you see, they forgot the fact that we're sovereign. They forgot the fact that they are subject to the Constitution, which is controllable by we the people and state legislatures because of the sovereignty in the states. They forgot that. And so by forgetting that, the federal government grew and grew and grew, and our attorneys who didn't know better just let it happen, let it happen, let it happen, until today we have, what, $20 trillion of debt. We got $150 trillion of unfunded liabilities. You and I owe $500,000, which is nuts. A little grandson, 6 months old, he owes $500,000. That's unconscionable. But my point is, we forgot that we are sovereign. That's why I keep harping on it. And that's why I keep trying to remind people that if you surrender your sovereign authority to the federal government, even the Supreme Court, you will not restore this republic, and your states will be always subject to the will of the federal government. And your individual character will be lost eventually. So yes, the Supreme Court rulings are subject to the countermands. And it also puts the Supreme Court in a place where they will think twice before they make a ruling. Let's say with Roe versus Wade, I happen to be a very, very strong pro-life Christian man. And the fact is that they will have, if this amendment had been in place in 73, they would have thought twice about deciding it the way they did. And also with this recent traditional marriage thing with homosexuals. They, in light of all the states that already passed amendments and constitutional amendments and so forth, protecting traditional marriage, they overruled all of it with that one decision, amended the Constitution as a result, and didn't require the ratification by the states. But if the countermand were in place, they would have thought twice about it, because they would have known that they better do something that the states are not offended by and write it in a way that's amenable to the states. So it really, if you lose sovereignty, we've lost our republic. That's the bottom line.
Wow, I really, really, really like the part of getting getting rid of Supreme Court rulings because to me the Supreme Court is, makes the final decision, and that's not right. That's a handful of people that are chosen. They're not voted in.
That's right. They're political appointees, and the left has learned that. Back in the 60s, the left began to practice the packing of courts and also the setting up of agencies under regulatory rulings to control the states. Uh, and with that in place, it doesn't matter too much who wins the presidency or even Congress. And the left knew that. The Democrats knew that. And that's why they over and over again emphasized these liberal, progressive, I call them Marxist judges and bureaucrats that they put in these agencies, the outcome of which is the states have no say in their rulings because of the supremacy clause. But with the Countermand Amendment, that will change.
And it will not give the Supreme Court, which is an oligarchy, so much power over us.
Well, the answer to that is yes. However, with this qualification, remember I said earlier that the Constitution with the Countermand would never be changed, and it won't. And the supremacy clause will still remain the same, meaning that the Supreme Court could still make a ruling that we don't like, but and it would be binding on all the states until that ruling is countermanded and rescinded by the state legislatures. Then it is no longer enforceable. So the Supreme Court very well can make a ruling binding the ruling on the states, but it will always be subject to the will of the people through the Countermand Amendment.
Wow, what a beautiful thing. And that will in turn make me want to go to my local government and perhaps run for office, because anybody can run for office. If you have common sense, get in your local government, because we need to take our control back. We need to volunteer for this. This is so important. One more question on your volunteering. To be a state representative, or I don't remember what you call it, how much time does that take? Say perhaps in a week. How much time does it take to volunteer to be a state representative for the Countermand Amendment?
Teresa, it takes as much as they have. If somebody wants to be a state director, they will have more responsibility than someone that is a supporter. The supporter might put in a couple hours a week if they have it. The state director might have to do a little bit more because he's got to coordinate the supporters and work with our national team as well. So and he has to do some follow-up and whatever. But he also was looking for people to be under him. So he's looking for other directors who would fall under him in that state to kind of share the burden. And so the amount of time is going to be, dependent on what an individual can give. On the other hand, we have some, like myself, I'm retired. None of us receive an income from this. We all do this voluntarily as patriots. But the fact is that I spend, every day 15 hours a day on this project, and 7 days a week sometimes, because it's that important to me. And I don't have to restrict my time in the same way that many other people would. And we have some others that are in that same category. I got a lovely director down in Texas, Kelly, and I just think the world of her. And I can't believe, how she sacrifices so much to get this thing moving forward. But she spends probably as much time as I do trying to help the legislators and the state directors in the states moving this initiative forward. And it's not important how many hours, it's important that they help us, because we do need help.
Right. And I mean, speaking of Kelly, I don't know how she does it. I really don't. She's doing 20 things at once at all times. And yeah, that's why I really wanted to get on the volunteer thing, because so many people out there that are listening to this want to do something to help. And if they can understand simply what the Countermand is, they can get behind it. You know what I mean?
Yes, and they can do it, an hour, 2 hours a week if they have that, or 10 hours a week if they have it. I will tell you, one of the needs I have right now is we need to finish up updating our database of state legislators, especially with their email and fax numbers. And I have 7,000 right now in my list, but I have not updated them for a while. So we're looking for some people to help us with updating that database list in the states. And if anyone out there wants to help us with that, please contact me, director@countermands.us. I would most welcome that.
Oh, great. And if people have questions, they can just go directly to the website, which I will definitely put up all over here, and ask right there, or do they email you?
They can go to the website, click the contact button, and the form will allow them to put their information in there and then make their statement. They may have a question, comment. Sometimes we get some criticisms, but the fact is most of them are positive, and they click the send and submit, and I get it, and we start looking at it and responding. Sometimes I send it off to Kelly to follow up. Other times I follow up myself, but we do follow up. And even our National Legislative Director, Mike Coons out of Alaska, he has a big part in helping the directors in the states with these legislators.
Yeah, if we could get, if you could get more people behind you, oh my gosh, I think this could take off, and as quickly, you have all of the paperwork and everything all ready for the states, don't you?
We do. They again go to countermands.us, and at the top of the page there are some links in, I don't know whether you call it a taskbar or you call it navigation bar, I guess. And you'll see a button that will say Countermand Amendment. Click that button and it'll allow you to read, it'll open up to a page and it'll allow you to read the text for the countermand. Now on that page there are three other links that are important, one of which is the template that we are using for all the state legislators to use when they sponsor this in their Senate or House. You can click that on and you get a copy of it. It'll also have instructions in that application. That's the application on Congress. There's another link that will be for the delegate resolution. We often use the North Carolina template application and delegate resolution as templates, and that also is online on that page. And then, but at any rate, the documents are there. You can copy them. You can send them to your legislators. And then there are also other documents. There's why the countermand, some very important bullet information about what the countermand is and why the legislators need to get behind it. Your video can become part of that. I have a video I just worked on yesterday, finished it up, and I was listening to it today, and it seemed like it's going to be okay. But at any rate, that'll be up there soon. But we have a lot of other links up there. We have a very important Balance of Power Commission hearing that I attended in Louisiana and had an hour testimony. A very important meeting. We've got links that go to some of my responses to, I guess, our competitors, Compact for America, as well as Convention of States. That's up there as well. There is something that has occurred to me earlier, and I didn't want to forget it, and that is this: as important as it is to get the Countermand Amendment finished as soon as possible, ratified, and I have no illusions. This is not going to be easy. We're stepping on a lot of toes. There are a lot of people out there who will see it as a big threat to their power base. But at the same time, once it's done, our real work begins. And that real work is actually researching through what we call state countermand committees, in which there will be individuals who will be identifying encroachment laws that affect their state, and then they will select the ones, prioritize them, and select them that they think need to be countermanded. That process will be ongoing. That will be a project that will never stop. And every time the federal government does something that steps out of line, this committee will actually be responsible for addressing it and doing something to help the state legislature get it through the other states. So when we see this thing ratified, now the state citizens can really take hold and do something very, very aggressively. Now, they can become legislators themselves, and I would encourage that, and run for office. But they can also be just simple citizens working through this committee. We do have a membership program that we're just putting in place. We're hoping that it will start raising a fair amount of money for us. These are membership cards to be a member of different kinds of members. The terminology I haven't fully understood yet or agreed to yet, but the fact is one might be the Eagle, the Gold Eagle membership and so forth, depending on the kind of membership. But this membership will allow them to have certain opportunities to work a little closer with their state legislatures and also their national legislators. We have a national executive team. Right now it's composed mostly of legislators from around the country. And that team will be identifying specific laws that affect multiple states. And then from there work with the state legislatures and their counterman committees, the purpose for which is to eventually develop a counterman. So we're working to get things moving at the top as well as at the state level, and by doing that have a flood of activity that's going to really help the states realize that they have the power to redirect the affairs of this nation as a republic. I often say to legislators two things. One, that the state legislatures are the most powerful governing body in America. They don't know that, but they are. They actually steer this republic for we the people, or can steer it for we the people, and this counterman will enable them to do that. And then also I remind them that they, because they have taken a vow to protect our Constitution and to defend it against all enemies, that they are statesmen more than they are politicians. And in that role as a statesman, they need to act accordingly and take on the responsibility of recognizing, one, the importance of this Constitution and taking the initiatives to protect it properly, so especially against federal encroachment. So those are the things that we see coming down the road, and I think that with that, the work is going to go on going for many, many decades to come.
Charles, do you see in the future for the Countermand Amendment, do you see Convention of the States and possibly other type of groups like that possibly joining up with you, maybe changing their mind, and or maybe everybody conglomerating into one and doing this?
The answer is there's always that possibility. Now, as far as Convention of a Balanced Budget Amendment Task Force, they already endorsed us 6 years ago. I endorsed them. We had some very long deliberations on how to use their No Runaway Convention Act. I gave them some specific advice, and they didn't seem to take it up in New Hampshire. But the fact is, along the way, they got tied up with Nadelson, they got tied up with COS, and they backed off the pre-approved text for the amendment by the state legislatures. And now they want the delegates to go as free agents. And they also backed off the delegate resolution, which they endorsed. I endorsed theirs. I still have it up on my citizen website, but they did not follow through at their end. So that's the problem that we have. And just like with COS, when they offered me to be part of their team, what they wanted me to be is part of their team according to their rules. But their rules were not the answer. That would just abdicate our sovereignty, and I wasn't going to buy that. So now here's the bottom line. And by the way, there's another group out there, Compact for America. Maybe at another time we can talk about that. And we are against their process also because they abdicate sovereignty to governors as well as to Congress. But at any rate, under Article 5, but at any rate, we do know how, assuming that COS gets to a convention first, and it's not them or us. You can have 100 conventions under Article 5. There's nothing limiting the number of conventions. But if you have a pre-approved text for a single-issue convention, you have a safe convention. But you have their kind of convention, none of them are safe. Plus, they establish a precedent that will damage future legislators from using Article 5 effectively in the future, damaging their sovereign authority because now they'll have to politically analyze or make political arguments as to why they have that sovereignty because of the way they did it. What the COS people are going to do is they're going to open up a political quagmire for generations to come. However, in spite of their ill thinking, in my opinion, I know how to stop them. We know how to stop BBA, and we know how to make their convention safe if they should choose. If they are successful at reaching an application of 34 states to join their convention or to convene their convention. So I'm not too concerned about that. We're not really saying a lot about it right now, but the fact is I believe that we have a very, very proper and safe way to make their convention safe so sovereignty remains in the legislatures for we the people. And I think that's about all I can say there.
Well, again, my hope is to have everyone join together, and possibly some of the people from COS and the others that are doing the same basic thing can really come to you and see the simplicity and the beauty of it. And that is what caught my eye, was the simplicity of it. And before any Civil War bloodshed, oh my gosh, takes place, why not try this? Because it is quite simple. It really is.
Yeah, and I would not object to anyone in COS or BBA coming to us and asking how they can help us or how they can join with us. I have no objection to that. But as long as you have an apple and an orange, and you have headstrong people who are moving in a direction that is not going to find any coalescing between the two, we have no choice but to just stay on track with what we're doing. On the other hand, there may be people in COS that recognize that the countermand amendment is the key, and they want to help us. Okay, then come on board. We need your help. But as I recall, in my last 2.5 years or so, talking about the countermand amendment to COS legislators who have been presented the COS position and have bought it, almost every one of them changed their position after they hear our story. And I had a call from a very important state. They're right now pushing it through their legislature, the counterman, both houses, and one of the sponsors calls me up, and he was a COS supporter. And he said, Charles, he said, I just want you to know, first, I thank you for showing us this. I didn't know that this was even available. I didn't even understand it. We thought COS had the proper answer, and they do not. And but at the same time, I want to thank you for taking the time to tell us how how the Article 5 should be used and how to rein in government. And with that, I was most gratified. But the fact is, his eyes were opened, and his state eyes are being opened. And there are other states that have the same thing. When I was in Texas speaking with the chief policy director down there for the governor, looking to at least get his encouraging influence on the legislature, he said to me, Charles, after we got done with our presentation, he said, Charles, Texas will approve this. Now, they're not in session this year. That's why we're still waiting. But we're hoping to get, right now I'm hoping that we'll get another meeting with them. We've had 2 so far this year, and now I want to meet with the governor himself, and we're working on that. But there are many other states that give us the same kind of response. So they are having their eyes open. The problem that we have in the sense of getting to all of these people is COS has millions of dollars. They have some major funders or funder who are funding everything. Many of their key directors get paid, and we don't. And so everything we do is based on volunteers. But we work with conviction. We work with the understanding that our approach is the right one, and that sovereignty hangs in the balance but for the countermand amendment, and that they are going to cause us problems in the future with the process of politicizing the whole thing within a convention that will make it impossible for the legislatures to properly use Article 5 in the future. But if there are COS people out there who realize that we have an approach that they want to support, then I welcome you on board, and we'll look forward to working with you as best we can.
Right, and it's not about one thing versus the other. It's about saving our country. It's about people wanting to save our country and recognizing that we have a serious, serious problem, just like you said, and that they can do something to help by volunteering for your cause, by running for office, by doing something, because now is the time. Now is the time.
Yes, absolutely. And actually, I would add to that, Teresa, now is past time. You know, had COS not gotten into this 2 years and 3 months ago, we would have been done by now. But when they came in, they created such a stir in the legislatures that I spend most of my time explaining to the legislatures the differences between the two. And takes time, takes effort, takes energy. Our other directors do the same thing. And so what they did is they hampered us, meaning to do well. They thought they had a better answer, but they really didn't, and they didn't think it through properly.
Right, and it's time for people to drop their egos and really just think simply and basically and get this thing done. So the power goes back to the states where it belongs. And people out there, you have to help. You have to help. If there's something that you don't understand, you can go to the website. I'll have it up on your screen. You can even look at the paperworks that are going to be given to your state legislatures. You can read it. You can see. I mean, what more can you ask for? This is total and complete transparency. I don't see that with Convention of the States, I'm sorry to say.
Right, and I thank you for that observation, Teresa. And the documents, as you said, are on the website. And when they go through the committees in the states, they don't have to redraft them. They don't have to. Sometimes they make some adjustments and so forth, as long as they meet certain criteria that we think are needed in order to make sure that sovereignty is retained. We almost always have no trouble with the documents. I guess I should say, if we have a few moments here, I should say something about Congress. And maybe I'm repeating myself, but Congress has the obligation to protect our Constitution. And when they receive applications from the states for an Article 5 convention, they have to decide whether that is a valid application. Now, believe it or not, some have documented 700 applications from the states over the last 200 years. The BBA probably got the closest to getting 34. They got 32. And then the John Birches and the Eagle Forum went nuts and convinced them that it was a constitutional convention, and 18 rescinded. And as a result, now they're back up to 27. And I support their effort, by the way. I do work with the BBA people. It's just that I don't like the fact that they have moved away from binding the delegates with a delegate resolution. However, and I think that that'll be worked out, because I've had indications from our meetings, a meeting with them up in North Dakota, that they like what we're doing and look like they will join us. And so it may be a doable thing here in the near future, in answer to what you would ask before. But the fact is, Congress now has to ask the question, what type of convention are you applying for? And right now, there's so much confusion everywhere that Congress is trying to find ways to control the Article 5 process. And they're doing it through the research that the Congressional Research Service is conducting. And they're recommending that Congress acknowledge that they are the final deciders on all these matters, and that an application can be acceptable to the Congress if the Congress decides that it's not acceptable. And so the ultimate decision then is in Congress's hands, according to CRS.
Wow.
We say hogwash. What good does it have to have Article 5 from sovereign state legislatures if you first need to ask Congress's permission to modify the conduct of the federal government? Doesn't make any sense. So we reject it. That's why we include in our application that Congress has 60 days to convene the convention after the 34th state sends its application in. However, there is a legitimate role for Congress. And if they do it properly, it's an important role. And that is, Article 5 says it's for proposing amendments. So if you have 12 states for the BBA You got 18 states for the, or 10 states for the COS. You got 5 states for countermand amendment. They're being asked to convene a convention. The first thing that they would and should be asking is, what kind of a convention are the states asking us to convene? And so they pick the COS and they say, well, they have 15 applications, but that's not good enough. And the countermand is different from COS's subject matter, and that's not good enough. So they may not convene any of them because none of them got the 34. The other problem that they may have with COS is they may conclude, look, the amendment calls for proposing amendments, not for proposing subjects. And so in that, the Congress may legitimately say, no, we can't convene that convention because it's simply not meeting the criteria of proposing an amendment, just like Congress does. And now the states do it also. The states can make any change they want in the Constitution, but they have to do it by proposing an amendment. They can't just arbitrarily have one constitutional convention and make everything right. Article 5 doesn't allow them to do that. So Congress has a role, an important role, to defend the Constitution, and if they do it right, they will look for the same application from 34 or more states before they convene the convention. And that's why we emphasize with the state legislatures, make sure that the title on your application is Countermand Amendment Convention. And don't make any mistakes about it. And this way, when Congress gets them, there's no ambiguity. And there's one more criteria that can be looked at here, and that is this. If Congress does play politics, even though they have been presented with proper Article 5 applications, and they delay and delay, in that case, I believe that the states, having met their constitutional requirements, can convene the convention on their own for the Countermand Amendment, or whatever it is that meets the criteria of Article 5. So there's still some latitude that we have here, and right now there seems to be a battle looming with Congress trying to figure out how they can control the Article 5 process. And their primary thinking deals with a flawed strategy, and that is that they call it a constitutional convention. They still buy into that, and so they're scared to death of it. So the point is that there's some lessons to be learned yet, some things to change, and I think that we will win the battle eventually because sovereignty is in the legislatures.
Well, and yes, and the transparency that your countermand amendment displays is there's leaves no doubt, no question in my mind. You have a website, you have all of the paperwork. To just be able to see the paperwork that the delegates or the legislatures, will be filing is a big deal to me, because then I can look at it and see it. And I know what's going to Congress. What more can you ask for?
Well, I think that's a good observation, Teresa, and I like what you said.
Well, I'm fully for it. I really am. Before bloodshed, before civil war, because people are getting killed. And the death of Lavoy Finicum and what is going on, just what was released last night from Oregon with that press conference, is outrageous. The lies.
They're picking them off one at a time.
Yes.
And I'm concerned about that too.
Yes, and I really think, especially over there in the western states, if they don't jump on this and get in on this, oh my, I'm just afraid of what can happen further.
Well, we're going to do our best. We're going to, I guess maybe one more thing. We have, because I got terribly sick on this last trip, I visited 11 states, 3.5 weeks, and I wound up in the hospital in Boise, Idaho for 3 days in intensive care. But the fact is that I managed to get back, and I'm recovering now. But my point is I can't travel as I did before. I do have to travel by plane if I go. That's the other reason why we need donations from those out there. But at the same time, we have a second plan that we have already started, and that is we have teleconferencing calls for the state legislators, and we will be working closely with them. And then we will also have special conferences with them. And then meetings, if there is a meeting that's needed at one of their committees, then we would fly there, and or one of our directors would go there. So the bottom line is that we have a plan in place, and we're going to try to catch up some time here, because I was hoping to get the 40 state capitals this year, and by July, and I'm not going to make it. I made 11. So we have to make conference over the next few months.
Well, hopefully we'll get some volunteers and that can really get on the ball with this, and hopefully even get these other COS or anyone else to really see the beauty and simplicity of this and really just join together in the process. I think that would be so important. I mean, the Patriot movement is very big and people want to do something. I really think that this can happen, as you said, but that you need help. You need help.
We do indeed need help, and we would welcome anyone's. By the way, there are people who are helping us in the state legislatures who actually have sponsored COS. Some have said, no, we don't want to do that. But at the same time, some have continued to do that, plus they sponsor us. So it's not like you can't do both of them. You can. And so those who are supporting COS need to understand that there is the opportunity of doing both if they should choose.
Oh, well, that's a good thing. I didn't know that. That makes a big difference. So, well, is there anything that you have to add further?
Teresa, my last thought is that if we don't keep the Lord in front of us and recognize that this nation wasn't an accident, we don't have 350,000 preachers and 300,000 churches and thousands of charities and thousands of missionaries. And we don't have this great nation by accident. God has a purpose, and we've gone away from that purpose, and we have denied him his place. And in that, he is pulling back his favor. And if we will ask him not only to forgive us for what we have allowed, the sins in the past, and allow him to guide us through this process, we will fail. And if he doesn't guide us, I'm telling you, we will not succeed. So those out there who know the Lord, and those that are just professing Christians, take this seriously. This is a very, very important matter, and the Lord has to be in the middle of it.
Very well said. Amen. Amen to that. That is so true. Charles, I thank you so much for your time and for what you have done and are in the process of doing for our country. I thank Kelly and Mike as well. They are working their butts off right along with you.
Thank you.